What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy, and today I have something kind of different, I guess in means of a different genre, but not so different in the means of sound design. Today I'm going to be giving you guys a free lesson for the masterclass that I have for the arcanum members on how to make different kinds of drums and stuff, and I'm going to be teaching you guys about how to make hats in phase plant, but also turn them into loops as such. Now, these are a few different use cases to which different like hats that you can create, and even though they're in mono, you can see that they are still have like the MIDI version of them, but we can kind of just go through these examples pretty quickly, and then I will jump in to show you how you can start designing hats for, whether it be trance or hip hop or halftime, or doesn't really matter. But before we do that, consider subscribing to the channel, and any kind of interaction that you can give, whether it be a like, a comment, or letting me know your thoughts, always goes a really long way. So this is our first one. Here's our second one, third one, fourth one, and then this one is actually just a loop that I pulled in. I'm not against using loops, it's just, sometimes I rarely end up going for those. So between all that, this is how everything sounds together with the drums. Now, I'm primarily going to be showing you how to design different kind of like hat patterns and stuff within phase plant, which is actually pretty straightforward. But I guess since we're doing a tutorial like this, I'll talk about some other things that I've done as far as design choices. I'm going to kind of steer away from most of the mixing stuff because I wouldn't say that this track has like banging drums or anything of the sort. And I'm constantly refining and changing my ways. Even now, like I recently posted that masterclass on stuff, and I'm already finding new stuff, which is great. So that means that I'll have to update it again pretty soon. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and open up a fresh phase plant patch, and let's go ahead and talk about the most important thing, or the, I guess, fundamental principle about designing percussion, which is 9 times out of 10 hats. So a hat typically has a lot of noise, and you can actually do that and achieve that in a lot of different ways, such as using just regular noise in this way. But what I would recommend is, instead of necessarily coming like this and then drawing in your MIDI, just to create a super short hat, which you can totally do, and that's fine. Something that I like to do instead is to actually keep the sustain up and go into creating different Lfo shapes in which to create these different patterns. So the first thing that we can do is really just create something that's kind of bang on grid. So we can just go like that, and then make sure that everything is evenly dispersed. So we go like that. And then we will do a fourth one here, kind of like so. And if you look at the pattern here, 1, 2, 3, 4, whenever we play this and add this to the amp, it's going to kind of sound like it's just a straight on hat pattern. Which of course is okay, but there's a lot more that we can do with this. The other thing that you want to consider as well is that a lot of times whenever you are wanting to add aliveness to your percussion, you don't just want to have everything kind of playing at the same velocity here. And sidechaining will help, but it's not always the best choice. So what you can do instead is you can start to variate these in certain use cases to where you're actually going to have different volume changes. That sounds way better to me already. And having something like this will allow you to kind of be able to find something within that and have the pattern set up. And then once you understand having the pattern set up, then the, I guess, like shaping of the tonalities and stuff kind of opens up from there. So let's explore a couple of those ideas. The first thing that we want to talk about is maybe using a filter. A lot of times you super high pass, or people usually super high pass their stuff because it kind of brings more airiness. Something else that you can consider is actually using some darker hats by using a bandpass. And something that's really cool about this in particular is that within this specific use case, if you actually send this through some very light processing, which I would just say something like distortion, then in some cases you can actually get like stick hits out of this. And so that's something that you can also kind of shape for as well, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in a second, but with just a little bit of distortion and something that is kind of akin to maybe a transient shaper, or there's some other stuff that you can do as well. Pulling the sustain down, pulling the attack up. You can hear that you've got these small resemblances of something of like a stick. So I'm going to pull off of this, and I'm going to talk about like some other use cases that you might want to use this for, some other stuff that you can do that would be really interesting. Now, for me personally, like I don't mind actually building a whole hat like sequence within FacePlant. And the reason why is because I can always, for one, turn off stuff and individualize or duplicate the patch. But two, sometimes I like to just play with this as if it were a DAW in itself and be like, okay, well, how can I play around with coming up with some cool and interesting rhythms? So right now we've already got our fourth pattern, and this is playing something that's like trance. So we're not going to focus on anything that's like swung per se, but if you wanted to do that, then you can always offset the phase or just draw your own hat patterns that will repeat in a time division, right? So if you throw everything off like this, for example, we've already created swing with that. So that's something that you can definitely try. I don't want to spend too much time on that just for the sake of keeping in context, but yeah, once you have something like that, then we want to think about the other pieces of percussion. So rather than putting ourselves through something that is going to, you know, put more work, we can just grab ourselves a new LFO here by hitting Option and then clicking. And then what we'll do is we'll actually set this to a slower rate and change the LFO pattern, maybe to something kind of like this. And what we can do as well is create variation also. So maybe something that you might want to do for something like rides is to create just a little bit of offset here. And we can kind of play around with sending this out kind of like this, assuming, okay, I was wondering why that wasn't working, but we can kind of play around with something like this to where it's long and then short, or short and then long. It doesn't really matter. But once we set this to the volume here, then you'll see now we've added another layer of complexity to this. Now, something else that you can consider is that whenever you are making drums and stuff, like there are different use cases to why you might want to spread your percussion out, or your drums rather, and there might be use cases where you might want to leave everything in mono. But with FacePlant, we have the ability to kind of move everything out to the side in this way too. So let's say there's a couple of different ways to do this. If I am playing out to an audience from the drummer perspective, then my hats would be on the left. If you are watching me or listening to me drum, because of the speakers that are coming out towards our way, right, then our hats would be a little bit to the right. Doesn't really matter however you want to do that, but we can kind of use this as an open hi-hat, and then what we can also do is add stereo, or maybe make this a little bit more pushed out. Doesn't really matter, right? There's not really a right or wrong. It's just kind of like a use case to what it is that you are trying to do. So because of this as well, something that is also considered like worth considering is that you don't have to send everything into lane 1 to process. So let's say we're creating kind of like a percussion group or whatever. We do want to throw a limiter over here, but something else that we can consider is sending everything into lane 3. So now from here, this will go to lane 1, and then this will go into lane 2. So that way, these are going to have their own individual processing chains. Now, the reason why you might want to do something like that is because maybe you kind of want to variate the different sounds that you have. Even though these are playing the same role as a closed hat and an open hat or whatever, or you could change it into a ride, it doesn't really matter. Something that is really fun to do is to grab yourself a crappy sample pack, it doesn't really matter, and you can come into this and use some kind of convolution reverb to... Let me see here if I can find one. I'm going to try to walk and talk at the same time. But you can find yourself some kind of convolution reverb to something that will allow you to, I guess, like humanize or make your stuff more organic. So let's see, we can just pull up some hats, something from Cymatics. It doesn't really matter. But now that we have something like this, we can duplicate this and find a different variation. And then as you listen to this, you'll see that this will actually now have some kind of metallic quality to it, to where it actually might sound more akin to a realistic hat. Of course, that's a little bit overkill, but you can see from that convolution that it has some natural resonances from that. So from playing around with this, you can see that just by using these, we have drastically changed the sound from being just kind of like, 808-ish or, just 909 rather, to something that actually has a little bit more physicality. Now, as far as processing these sounds and doing whatever, one thing that you can consider is maybe even thinking about doing frequency shifting, because whenever you push stuff down pretty low, I would be careful about pushing stuff up because that's when things can get really sharp. But if you push stuff low, you get some other interesting things. So... Or you could do something where you have one that's really far down and one that's a little bit less. And you can end up getting some really interesting stuff in that way. Now, from that, we can pretty much build out an entire suite from this, like I said before, because we have access to so many generators within Faceplant. And you can do this with several patches of, like, I don't know, Serum or Vital or even Falcon or pretty much anything. But I just find that this is streamlined mostly towards this because of the workflow that we have for something like that. So now what we can do is we can create a crash or a ride or something of the sort just by having one really long envelope here. So I'm just going to go like that. And then you can see it's going to go boom. And then maybe you don't want it to have so much attack, so you can actually kind of pull off of that just a bit. And that will help with the mixing process to preserve some of the transients. But within this, we can set this to 50%. And the reason why I put it at 50% is because this technically goes to 200. So if you leave it at 0, then it will go from having 0 volume all the way to, I guess, like a volume that you would probably want to keep this stuff at. Or what we can also do is kind of have something like this to where and we can kind of just play around with sending this in between different lanes. So obviously from building this out, it doesn't really matter what drums in particular that you want to try to create. Just by shaping noise, you can pretty much create whatever it is that you want to. There is a little bit of intuition that comes into this. So right now I'm kind of just going over like hi-hats, but you can definitely build other means of percussion. You can definitely do, you know, toms and congas and stuff of that sort if you want. But through having this and hopefully exposing you to this kind of workflow, you can see how you can work pretty efficiently in building your entire percussive suite from just Faceplant and just shaping white noise and having a couple of effects on that. So in order to actually make this stuff kind of like work though, and some other tricks that I would like to show you just because we're in the same video, is that something that I have experimented with in this particular track is having some fun with layering the same signal. And so pitch shifters are another really awesome thing that I would recommend that everyone try. But through listening to this, this is not going to be included. This is the fresh patch. But through listening to this, if I were to turn this off, it would sound very different. So something to maybe try is to have an original, I guess, signal that's not really touched. The second one would be that same trick that we showed you with frequency shifting, where I did push everything up, but I'm kind of just trying to get a little bit more air out of that. Shout out to Dash Glitch for teaching me some tricks about getting more air out of your mixes. I would definitely recommend going to check out his channel, especially regarding mixing and producing psytrance. And then also, like I said before, this little guy creates some really cool and interesting layers or percussion with that because it's pitch shifted artificially down by 12 semitones. So you get this really cool kind of like rumble, or not rumble, but this really, I don't know, it just sounds really cool to me. Now the last thing that we can talk about is the kind of like getting everything to gel together, which you can definitely use some compression, but I don't really find that's all that necessary. What I will do though is just do a really quick delay on this and set this to, I guess, 3 out of 16 or 1/8, or sorry, I guess, yeah, you can't really divide that, at least not as a whole number, but we want to turn this up and set this to duck, and then you can either set this to ping pong or regular delay. It doesn't really matter, but what this will do is give this a little bit of shaker aspect to this. So let me go ahead and turn this back off. Sorry about that, and then we will solo this, and then let's listen to this again. So from having that, that's a very classical kind of sound that allows us to have a little bit more washiness from our percussion. And you might want that, you might not want that, but that's a very easy way to implement that within, or I guess like that's a very easy way to like add more stuff to, or more interest rather, to your percussion. So within all that stuff, hopefully I've shown you a few tricks that you can use to make your hi-hat patterns, or even just building percussion and stuff really cool within Faceplant. Again, I invite you to try to do all the other things that I offer in the masterclass, which is creating stick hits, creating claps that are super layered, kicks, of course, really big snares that are both kind of synthetic and organic and metallic sounding, stomps, all different kinds of stuff that you can kind of get into. But I definitely just kind of wanted to show you anyways how in depth and how much crazy stuff as far as drums go you can get inside of Faceplant. And I cannot just say enough good things about how awesome this thing is. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about this, for one, let it be known I'm not an expert on Trance by any means, but this was just a project that I did yesterday that on stream from scratch, if you want to go see that. It'll be up public for a few more days, but any of the members of any tier can go watch the VOD later. But for one, I'm not an expert on Trance, but at the same time, there are some principles that can still apply, and then you can kind of build off of those concepts and start to use that and think about how you can make your own or make that stuff your own. So that way you don't have to feel like you have to copy the patch, or instead of producing, instead of being like, oh, I got to lay a track down, you can just kind of come into here and start thinking about building different sequences within the LFOs and stuff that you have in here and create some really interesting stuff. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you found this video informative. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.